Paris Schutz and the changes to the city's TIF program. Paris.
Eddie, thank you. It's been called a mayoral slush fund, a kitty of over $1 billion that the mayor gets to dole out to favored projects at a time when the city is choked for revenue. Now, it appears as if Mayor Emanuel has heard his critics. The mayor announced last week he will phase out some of the city's controversial tax increment financing, or TIF districts. It could mean a windfall of hundreds of millions of dollars to help the Chicago Public Schools deal with its financial crisis. But could the move only incrementally boost the city's bottom line and actually threaten future economic development? Joining us are Tom Tresser, a community organizer who heads up the TIF Illumination Project, and Greg Hines, at Crane Chicago business columnist who writes about local politics and government. Thank you both for being here with us. First, Greg Hines, explain to us once again exactly what tax increment financing does.
Well, tax increment financing, the way it works in Chicago, effectively is a second property tax increase that applies only in a certain area, and it takes money that's raised in area and uses it to do things that will hopefully make the area grow faster than it would have and create more taxes than it would have. And then eventually, at the end of 23 years, the taxes go back into the regular pot for schools and everything else like anywhere else in the city.
Tom Tresser, the mayor announces that he's going to sunset 7 of these TIF districts in the Loop. You, Ben Jarafsky at the Reader, have been very critical of TIFs. Is this a sign that he is hearing the criticism and moving in the right direction?
Yes, it's a drop in the right bucket, but it's only a drop. The TIF Illumination Project has done research that has revealed $1.7 billion in property taxes sitting in the TIF accounts as of January 1st, 2014. It's our contention that that's a giant slush fund. We'd like a forensic audit on that money. He says it's committed. We'd like to know where it is and for what it's committed. But I'll tell you this, his move proves that the mayor has complete control over this program and he can do what he likes with it.
Well, you're saying that over the next 5 years that $250 million will be returned to Chicago Public Schools and other taxing bodies. Is that accurate?
Right. Well, the 7 TIFs in question, and we don't want to bore your watchers with the list of the TIFs, but at the end of 2000...
I believe we have a map. They're mostly in the Loop.
That's right. That's right. So that's excellent. So right now, at the last numbers we had, those TIFs peeled out $91 million in tax increment in 2013, and they had a fund balance, that is to say in their combined accounts at the end of 2013, which is the last year we have numbers for. It was $220 million. So that's what's on the table right now.
Greg Hines, diverse voices like the Tribune editorial board, and as we mentioned, Ben Jarafsky, who's more progressive at the Reader, have been on board with this move to sunset 7 TIF districts. You're not so hot on it. Why is that?
I'm a little afraid, Paris, are going to throw out the baby with the bathwater here. A TIF is an economic development tool. Like all tools, you can use it for good or for bad. There have been through the years a fair amount of abuses. I think they were mostly under Richard M. Daley, the prior mayor. This mayor has kind of changed the direction of the program. Most of the money isn't going to pay for private companies. It's going to pay for infrastructure. For things like the expansion of Walter Payton High School, or the new CTAL station next to the Google headquarters on the near west side, or keeping Finkel Steel in town, or expanding Jones High School, the new L stop by the medical center. My colleague here is right that the mayor pretty much determines it, like he does a lot of other things in Chicago. But in a world where there's not a lot of other means to pay for infrastructure, the concern is if you take this money away, we're not going to be able to prime the pump, as it were, to pay for the things, particularly in downtown, which is the economic heart of the region, that we need to keep that healthy as a job-producing center.
Tom Tresser, what about that concern that the city might turn to things like borrowing, which are equally or more odious, some people view, than TIFs?
Well, in the words of Professor Richard Dye at the University of Illinois, TIFs have nothing to do with economic development. They are a hidden tax, they're hidden finance, and they're hidden governance. So I would say that why can't we have a master plan for expanding the facilities of the things in the city that need expanding? Where does the next park need to be built? And I would say that since we don't have a master plan, instead of planning, we have a rifle shot, clout-driven program called TIFs, which are gumballs of tasty projects that get dropped on a community that already has money. You see, the problem is when you create a TIF, you handcuff the money to that area. So what about parts of the city that don't have or need rapid transit expansion? No TIF, nothing for them. So I'm not against expanding our infrastructure. I'm all for that. But let's have a plan that's equitable for everyone, not just the Loop and the mayor's friends.
To that point, Greg Hines, what if, you mentioned that the mayor sort of has total control over this, what if aldermen had a vote? Should city council be able to vote on where TIF money gets spent?
There are ways that should be considered to increase the transparency and the public review of this, but I don't accept this notion that this is the city against the downtown against the neighborhoods. That's a fairy tale. More than half the jobs in this city are downtown. If you don't have a healthy central business district, guess what? A lot of us are out of work. You know, it's easy to say, well, we'll find another source of infrastructure money. Look at what Congress is doing. They haven't been able to pass a highway bill now for 5-6 years in a row because nobody wants to raise the taxes to pay for it. So little by little, our roads are falling apart, our bridges are falling apart, our public transit agencies aren't getting the money that they need. I can live with reform, but I'm concerned here that in this desperate hunt to come up with money now to pay old bills, mostly for pensions, the city is going to put limits on what we need to grow jobs and grow our economy. And ultimately, that's the way out of the problems we're in.
Tom Tresser, there are a few ways that the city and CPS could see revenue from TIFs. One is if, as we mentioned, the TIF sunsets. Two is if there's a surplus in these accounts, that gets returned back to the city. Now, the mayor is also proposing to return at least a quarter of all surplus funds in these accounts back to CPS and the city. Is that going to make a dent?
It'll make a small dent, but we are saying there's $1.7 billion on the table, and if we take 56% of that, that's on the order of $980 million, a one-time cash infusion for the Board of Education. The mayor says that money is spoken for, but he refuses to account for it in a responsible manner. So, Mayor, if you're watching this, come clean. Where's our money? We want a list of projects and backing information to prove your points.
Greg Hines, is it as simple as saying there's $1.7 billion sitting in these TIF accounts and they can just be used, they can just be returned to CPS and the city just like that and basically wipe out the budget crisis in both of these bodies?
No, it's not. I mean, there is some ambiguity here. God bless our friends at City Hall. Sometimes aren't as specific in detail as they ought to be. But in some TIF districts, they've gone out and borrowed money. You need this money to pay for the bonds back or the borrowing back. In other cases, you have multi-year projects. The mayor's people claim that just about everything there, something like 80%, is committed. I don't know if that figure is right. I haven't seen the full accounting. But clearly there's a lot of stuff that they've announced and are planning that is spoken for. You know, and again, I'm going to ask the question, if you look at what they've actually spent the money for under this mayor, like keeping Sinai Hospital open or building L-stops so people can get to work, which of these projects would we not do? These all serve a purpose, and it's easy to say, you know, take all the extra money and spend it on schools, but we need this other stuff too.
And Greg, you've kind of engaged in a journalistic war on words with Ben Jarofsky, the reader who has always claimed that TIFs rob CPS of cash that it would have otherwise received. Is that a real correct assessment of how the TIF works?
Under most circumstances, no, and the reason is because under tax caps now, what the Board of Education doesn't collect from the TIF district, it collects from the rest of the tax base. That's why TIF in this environment really is an extra tax increase. So the schools get what they want, and there's an argument that when the TIF district dies, the money that's in the TIF pot then goes back into the normal tax pot. There's an argument that if you hadn't created the TIF district and it didn't do its job, that money wouldn't have been there at all, and therefore the schools would be worse off than they would when they were beforehand. Hopefully the TIF district does its job and it generates more growth.
Tom Tresser, what about that? Is this notion that creating a TIF actually robs CPS of cash a little overinflated? Not
in our experience. There's a couple of points here. First, about $850 million of TIF money have gone to CPS construction, but only 48% of that sum has gone to neighborhood schools. So TIF money is flowing to schools for school construction, but the majority of it has been sent to selective enrollment in charter schools. That's a no-no. I'm opposed to that. But back to funding our schools, we need to remember a few things. One, we're not collecting all the money we should be collecting. Now, maybe that's a discussion for another show, but we've been discussing a financial transaction tax and some other ways that we might collect revenue for not just the schools, but for the operation of our local government. So let's put this into a larger context of what is the true financial status of our city. I do not believe we're broke, and until we get a forensic independent audit of our city, we're going to have these back and forth conversations between people who defend the mayor and people like myself who've been very critical of the administration for decades.
I'm all for audits, but what's the difference between a neighborhood school and a non-neighborhood school? A school's a school. Aren't they all
sir.
kids? Don't they all deserve an education?
I would take exception to that. I mean,
they don't all deserve an education?
A neighborhood school is the one where you can walk to without a lottery, without rigmarole. It's got a world-class education, and there's no penalties or fines or other games that charter schools play to inflate their success rates.
So we shouldn't have magnet schools and schools that try to up the game and be better than the typical neighborhood school.
I'm for making the starting salary of CPS teachers $150,000. You know, but let's put our money where our mouths are. Let's make every neighborhood school a world-class school without all the rigmarole.
All right, now
my point is that there's value judgments that are coming out here that we might agree with or disagree with, but it doesn't have anything to do with the TIF.
Yeah, this is a different discussion. I'm going to have to end it here. Thank you both.
If the money is still going to stuff like under this mayor, to stuff like building schools and CTA stations and whatever, and I'm all for public audits and putting it in context, and I'm all for considering taxes from other sources. But again, this is not a no free lunch situation. If you take this money away, somebody's going to get hurt, and parts of the city's economy aren't going to do as well as they would have.
All right, Tom Tresser, Greg Hines, thank you both very much. Chicago Tonight continues in a moment, so please stay with us.
Chicago.